Alright, so I'm doing this video just as kind of like a review of some of the things we've learned so far and just sort of like things I think are fundamental that you should be aware of and practice so that the rest of the boot camp goes well for you. Alright, so let's go over for loops. Okay, this is the fundamental we'll be talking about today. So let's talk about how to use them in different circumstances. So first one, let's loop through an array without using the let of combination. So I have this array at the top, example array 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So we begin for loops obviously with the keyword for in the parentheses. Then you declare a variable that you're going to use for your for loop. This variable is just for the for loop to keep track of where it is. So for example, remember arrays have indices, right? So this is index 0, this is index 1, 2, etc., etc. So I need a variable to keep track of where I am in the array as I loop through it. Remember, looping, iterating means going through all the different elements in the array. So I'm going to go ahead and make a variable called I and make it start at 0. Okay, because I want to start off at the first element of the array, which is 0. So during the first loop, I will be 0, so therefore it will become here. Then I will be 1, then I will be 2, etc., etc. All right, so the first part is where does your loop start? Okay, what element do you want your loop to start at? You don't have, it doesn't have to be 0, it could be 2. You could start here if that's what you wanted to do. All right, the next part of the for loop is how, like, basically what condition should it check to see whether or not it stops. All right, because the for loop is going to, the whole point of a for loop is we want it to run a certain number of times. So for example, I have this array and it's got 5 elements in it, so I want it to loop through 5 times. um, I'm going to make it a little more generalized because let's say we had a different array. We just some numbers in it. 15, 21, 10. Okay, I just put some random numbers. All right, now, when I loop through this array, there's 5 elements, but when I loop through this array, there's 6 elements, right? So an array could have any number of elements in it. It could have 10, it could have a billion. I want to just loop through any array that I'm given. So, for example, if I get 5 elements, I want to loop through 5 times. If I get 6 elements, I want to loop through 6 times. So, the way we can do that is, let's kind of wrap this in the function. So I'm going to take a second here and do function loop through array, which will take an array as a parameter. I'll move that inside the function. All right, so this array variable here in this function could be this one, it could be this one, it could be any array, right? I don't know the number of elements that are going to be in here. So for example, I could call this loop through array function with loop through array parentheses and use example array as an argument, or I could use example array 2 as an argument, or I could just make up my own array. I don't even need to have a variable. I could literally just put an array in here and do this. Okay, so the thing you get to remember here is we're looping through an array, but we don't know how many elements are in it. So that's fine. What I'd like to do is I'd like to loop through until I reach the end. Well, we have a property of arrays called length. Okay, length of an array tells us how many elements there are in an array. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the length of example array is 5. So what I'm going to do is I want this loop to continue so long as I is less than array dot length. Okay, so I is 0, I is 1. So let's go through this one actually. There's 5 elements, right? The first loop, I is 0. 0 is less than 5. Good, continue. Okay, 1 is less than 5, 2 is less than 5, 3 is less than 5, 4 is less than 5. I will become 5, but there's no more array, right? We're out of array. So that way it will stop. When I is 5, 5 is not less than 5. So that means that this for loop will stop, and I would have gone through and hopped through each one of the numbers. All right, so last part is I plus plus. I want I to go up every for loop. All right, let's review this. This first part is a variable that we're going to use to keep track of where we are in the for loop. You could call this potato. It doesn't matter. Like, it's just a variable. Okay, I is nothing special. Okay, I want this loop to continue so long as this is true, right? And then this makes the loop go up by 1 each time. All right, so now I'm looping through my array, and this is the way you do without the of keyword. Okay, this is a common way to loop through an array. Practice this syntax until you get it. And then I'm just going to go ahead and console.log the number at that index. So remember, I is the index of the array, not the value, but the index. So in order for me to console.log the element at that index, I'm going to use bracket notation. Okay, array bracket I. Remember that this means go to this element, okay, this index, and give me the element. So I starts off at 0, it will give me 1. I will be 1, it will give me 3. Okay, practice this. Okay, you should be able to effortlessly loop through an array, all right, and then be able to get the value with bracket notation. Now, you don't have to do this. You could use a different way of looping through the array, and we're going to do that loop through the array with of, and then take an array as a property. All right, so here, some people don't like this syntax. They think it's clunky. They would rather be able to directly get the element of an array rather than trying to use this bracket notation. So what you can do is, we're still doing a for loop. Then we're going to do let num, and this is just a variable here. Okay, this could be aardvark. This could be zither. It doesn't matter. It's a variable. So we're just going to do num of example array. Okay, now what is this doing? This is also looping through the array, right? So we're still looping through each element, except this variable here is going to be the value at that index. So I'm going to do console.log num, and I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. Well, no, there's no need to do that. I'll just call the function. And I'll do loop through array with of example array. I will save my work. And then let's give this a shot and see what it does. Okay, I'm going to see in the fundamentals, and I'm going to node fundamentals.js. Okay, and see how it console.logs each of these numbers. This num variable stands for each whatever is in that index. And again, it doesn't have to be a number. Like, let's say I just change this to zither. Okay, now it's zither. Okay, it doesn't really care what the type is. All right, so this is great for like looping through objects. Okay, like this is really convenient for looping through objects because then you can easily grab the object and do something with it. This is great if you just really care about like targeting an index. At the end of the day, you can get one or the other to do what you want them to do. You should just know both of their syntax, especially this one. This one confuses beginners a lot because they don't remember array.length and they don't remember bracket notation for how to get an element at a certain index. So if you are not comfortable with this one, I would practice this in Notepad. Okay, actually, let me show you something while we're at it. Let me show you how we did things in the dark ages. Well, yeah, I'll do that in this video. All right, so like, if you want to practice whether or not you know this syntax, open up Notepad. Go ahead and you can literally code in Notepad. This is the way I did things when I was like 16, right? Like, we didn't have Notepad plus in my day, so we literally like wrote code like this and then saved it as a JS file. So I would go like, let me find my C drive for my coding folder. So I would go to my coding folder and I would literally save this as, let's say, forloops.js. Okay, that's how we coded back in the day. You open up Notepad, you saved it as a .js or .html or whatever, and then you had to run it yourself. There was none of this fancy stuff. Okay, so if you don't think that you remember this syntax, the best way to check is write in Notepad and see if you can do it from memory. If you can't, I would practice. All right, there's a couple other things we can do. So nested for loops. All right, nested for loops means a for loop within a for loop. All right, so what you can do is, like, for example, for let I equal 0, I is less than array.length. Let's wrap this in another function actually while we're at it. Function nested for loop takes an array as a parameter. All right, so for, let's actually have two arrays. We'll have array 1 and array 2. All right, for let I equal 0, I is less than array.length, I plus plus. Now what makes it nested is if you have a for loop within a for loop. So now we're going to have two for loops. I'm going to loop through array 2 first, okay, and then the first array second. So for let j equal 0. I'm using a different variable now because I is going to keep track of its place in the array number 1. J is going to keep track of its place in array 2. Okay, that's why they're different variables. J is less than array 2.length, j plus plus. Right. So this is a nested for loop. They're very mind-bendy, okay, because you're looping through two different things. So that could be a little bit weird to think about, but this is the basic syntax. The main thing, though, is that the inner for loop has a different variable to keep track of its place than the outer one. Okay, j is going to be different than I. Okay, so let's actually try this. I'll console.log j and console.log I. Okay, I'm going to make them the same size, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll just make just for clarity's sake. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and run this. No overlapping numbers. Okay, good. So we'll just call nested for loops. Example array and example array 2. Okay, we get a bunch of numbers. So did I call it something else? All right, so I console.log j, console.log I, and you can see like how it's looping through. If you want to see the actual values, then what you can do is, since j is for array 2, we'll do j. And then since I is for the first array, we'll do I. We're going to do run it again. Okay, so first it gave me 7. Okay, which is here. And then it gave me 1. Then it gave me 18. And then it gave me 1. So you see how it got to the first one 1, and then it started looping through the second array. Take some time to really like play around with this because nested for loops are very hard for beginners to get. They don't come up they come up actually like a decent amount. I just want to make sure that you realize that there are two different variables here. And just play around with this. All right, couple questions they may ask on like interviews, maybe not interviews. Actually, they did actually this one interview once, so I say that that's fair. Is getting sum of elements, average of elements, and getting largest number in an array. These are just kind of like basic things you need to like know. Of course, you could do these with those built-in fancy JavaScript functions, but it's very good to know how to use a for loop to get these, because then you know what the function is actually doing. So let's do sum of elements. So function sum of elements, take in an array as a parameter. Now this is the hard part for beginners. You don't know how many elements are in this array. You don't know what numbers they are. It's just some kind of array, right? That's the mind-bending part. A lot of beginners think that they have to go and make an array. No, this function is going to take an array of some kind. We're going to assume it's of numbers, and it's going to sum them up. All right, the basic algorithm is this. You're going to have a variable to hold the sum. Okay, I'm going to start off at 0. Then I'm going to loop through my array. Let I equals 0. I is less than array.length. Because remember, we don't know how long this array is. I have no idea. Okay, it could be 3, could be 10, could be 10 billion. I plus plus. So see how that syntax we did at the beginning is helpful? Okay, if you're still struggling with this syntax, this problem becomes difficult. Okay, now the algorithm is this. Sum starts off at 0. I'm going to go to the first element of my array, which will be when I equals 0. I'm going to go get that element. Okay, I'm going to take that element and add sum to it. So for example, let's say the array is 1, 3, 5. Okay, first element is 1. Sum plus equals 1 means sum will be 1. Then we get to the next element, 3. Then we'll add 3 to 1, which will become 4. Then we'll add 5 to 4, which becomes 9. And then at the very end, sum will be the sum of all the elements in the array. And then we will return the sum. Okay, that way we will add everything together. Okay, so this takes a couple, this is a good example of how and why we study so much syntax, because if you're thinking about this and stumbling over it, you can't think about the actual algorithm of I need a placeholder variable and then to add each element to that placeholder and then return it. Okay, so there's a lot of like basic things you got to be able to do in order to get this much more complicated problem. Averages works very similarly. Function get average takes an array as a parameter. Right. Well, what are we doing with an average, right? Well, an average is just summing all the elements together. So this part is the same. And so what do we do at the end? After we add them all together, we divide by the number of elements. So let average is equal to sum divided by array.length. Okay, because array.length tells us how many elements there are. Then we can return the average. Okay, so this part is the same. We're just adding, see how this one builds off the other one? So we're already adding them all together, and the only difference is that we have to get the divide at the end. And you could even write this as one line if you really wanted to. You could just return sum divided by array.length. You don't even need this variable declaration. Right, getting a largest number of an array, and again, we don't know, this array could be an array of a gajillion numbers, we don't know. All right, now this one's a little bit different. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have let current largest number equals 0. Same placeholder strategy, right? Then we're going to loop through the array again. I is less than array.length, I plus plus. All right, and then we are going to do something different than adding them together. I'm going to compare each number to my current largest number. So we have to use if statements. If my current, okay, array I is my current number. Okay, if it is greater than my current largest number, I will set current largest number to array I. Here's the logic. I go through, let's say it's 1, 3, 7, right? So current largest number is 0. 1 is greater than 0. Now it's 1. Then we go to the next element. 3 is greater than 1. Now it's 3. 7 is greater than 3. Now it's 7. Okay, every time I meet a bigger number, I'm going to set this variable to that number. Once I get to the end, I can just go ahead and return it. Okay, so these are all like algorithms, all right? These examples I've just given you are all algorithms of how to do things. There's much more complicated ones, but essentially you're giving it a set of instructions, and you can see how these for loops and things we learn and like return are all building blocks in order to build these algorithms. So it's very important to like be sure you're comfortable with like the basic stuff first, so that way you can spend your mental energy on understanding these algorithms. And I would practice these. Like I would try to do this in my sleep, because you'll pretty much be like you won't ever have to do this in your job, like real talk. But it's good to be able to train yourself to think algorithmically. All right, that was review of the fundamentals. We'll do objects next.